Hello bookhos, I'm back for one more video for now on getting started in embroidery. Hello and welcome to Book Hoarding by Bianca. I'm Bianca and today I'm going to talk to you about one more thing regarding setting up your embroidery workspace. When you're getting started in embroidery, you're probably going to do samplers that are not on silk or anything very fine. But as you keep making things and getting inspired by things like historical outfits or accessories, you're probably going to want to expand and start working on fancier fabrics. And basically I'm saying you're going to probably go from like the embroidery cloth, which can range from like the Ida cloth to cotton, and move into something like silk. I'm not talking about sheer fabrics today because this is going to be completely different in terms of what to do for that. Instead, I am talking about embroidering on silk things or related very delicate fabrics. So obviously when you're working with a more delicate fabric and you're putting that in the hoop, you're adding more strain to it on the hoop because it is a little bit more delicate, so you'll want to make sure that you take it off the hoop every time you're done working on it for the day and not just leaving it on there for months at a time. And the other thing is you're going to want to put some backing on the area that you are embroidering. When we're talking about backing, there's going to be a bunch of options. This is just going to be covering a couple of them, but I think maybe these are going to be helpful in just getting you started and figuring out what works for you and works best for the materials you're doing. There is stabilizer that you can buy and put behind things. You've probably noticed some kind of stabilizer if you've ever bought, manufactured clothes that have embroidery on them. There's probably something in the back that has stabilized that fabric. Growing up, usually I saw little, they cut around the embroidered piece, and so you'd have a little bit of extra fabric on the inside in between the stitches. I think a lot more people are using water-soluble stabilizer now, and that's pretty much just a stabilizer, like a thing that it's really tough, like while you're working with it. Not really tough, but like it's sturdier than just like a fabric, and then you put it in water and it just dissolves. I've actually noticed quite a few embroidery kits having that now, especially being able to print on stabilizer, on water-soluble stabilizer, the pattern, and then you stick it on to your piece that you're working on. So that does exist, it's out there. For certain fabrics that you don't want to get wet, that's probably not going to be a great choice for you, right? Like you're not going to want to wash out water-soluble stabilizer. So there are other stabilizers out there if you're okay having them on the back of your piece, but I'm going to give you an option that I learned recently. So I am currently taking a correspondence class from Royal School of Needlework on gold work, and they gave me a piece of silk and a piece of cloth in my kit. Now, you can use pretty much anything that makes sense for you in your project, because in terms of like the backing fabric, obviously using like a really basic muslin, if it's not super heavyweight, is probably a great idea because no one's going to see it. If you're using just like a kind of quilting cotton in the back, that might be, you might be able to see through the fancy fabric and see that. So I'd say you want to try to match the color as much as possible probably when you're working it, or just have it be a really neutral color that's not going to show through. So the way that the Royal School of Needlework course taught this was that you would take the sturdier piece, put it down, and then you would put the silk piece on top. You'd pin all the sides, make sure it's smoothed out as you're going. There's no stretch happening, like you don't want to stretch across the grain. You do want to make sure that the grain matches up. So you're not going to be putting stuff canted or anything. You want to make sure grain lines are matching, because that will mean they're stretched to one of these where they're not stretching the other, and that's bad. And again, like these are tips for woven and non-stretch fabrics, just nothing with actual like stretch and nothing that's knitted. This doesn't really work the same way. There are other ways to do knits, but I'm not talking about that today. Anyway, so after you've put your fabric on top of the other, and the other is a little bit bigger, then you baste around there. They use a herringbone stitch, a little catch stitch. All these things are great to just mount that piece, and you just go around all the edges until you're done, and that should make it a little bit easier to work on that piece. Specifically, again, like this is the benefit of working with really fancy fabrics, is giving the embroidery something to better adhere to, and it also, I feel like, makes that some of the weight not just be on the delicate material. Specifically for gold work, it makes a lot of sense because it's a very heavy needlework technique, and you're going to want a little more on the back to help it stay there. And also, as you're doing things on the back, there are going to be two different types of needlework that you're doing and surface work that you have to do things on the back to finish a thing, and you'll need that space to be sturdy and not just like a silk that you're afraid of catching, or potentially like a raw end of something, like metal work or something, you know, eventually shredding it. So there's little things that you'll learn along the way as you're doing your techniques of choice. But I wanted to show you too kind of how you don't have to do it for the whole thing. I adopted this kind of idea and did it for a much smaller piece of embroidery that I'm doing. So I've been sitting on this pattern for this embroidered reticule for a very, very long time, and I started just finally going at it. And one of the things I did was I started setting up the silk on little pieces of muslin, just to give it a little bit more stabilization so that it wasn't just like these pieces just hanging off of it. So I'm gonna let you watch my tutorial on that next, and hope it's helpful. Okay, so you're gonna need a flat surface. You're gonna need your embroidered piece, or your piece to be embroidered, I guess. You're gonna need some backing. I'm using just muslin that I get from Mood that I really like. You will want to make sure that you have enough to go with the grain, so you're going to want to match grains. You'll need a hoop, obviously, all your embroidery accessories, and you'll also want to make sure that you've flattened everything out and ironed it and it's ready. I'm going to use a smaller hoop for this, and I also cut the calico smaller, or muslin. That's how you know I've been watching too many British tutorials. Anyway, so make sure everything's smoothed out and that the calico is behind the area that you're going to be embroidering on. So I just marked where I'm going to be covering my stuff there, and then you're going to want to pin everything. And again, make sure that the grains match, because if one is on the bias or something against one straight grain, then it's going to stretch. One piece is not going to fit. And then you're just going to pin so that everything's taut. For doing silk and stuff, there are, you know, more fine needles so that you don't, you know, hurt the delicate fabric. But you will just go along the edges. And then for this, I do the back as well, because that is a side that I want to make sure is taut as I am working on it, right? So you can see here, I'm just going to take my needle and some handy wax that will help the thread not knot as badly. And then you're going to make a little kind of like block of stitches. I think I do 3. I don't know. But you're going to do 3 or 4 in a row to just lock those stitches in. And then you can cut the knot out. Poorly, like I did. Then you're just going to do a basic catching stitch. This one runs left to right. So this is a fun one to do if you like working that direction. But you're just going to do little catching things on each side that kind of hold both fabrics in place in 2 different areas. You can see I did serge the edges of the silk, just because it frays very easily. It's very delicate, so I just wanted to make sure that as I'm continuing to work with it, it doesn't fray a ton as I'm embroidering it. So you will just make this little catch stitch, working your way across here. And I will also do this on the back as well. But for now, let's fast forward through my little herringbone stitch, because it does take a second, and it is kind of strange to do this on a flat surface like this. I will say, like, if you've pinned this, you probably could just pull this closer to you, but I'm trying to get this under a camera, so working on it's a little hard. When you get to the end of your thread, you're just going to make the same 3 little stitches very close together on top of each other, essentially, and then cut off the thread. So depending on what you want to do with this, you can either keep these on here and then take them out later, or if they're sewn within your seam allowance, then they'll never show through. And I'm using contrasting color so that you can see it a little bit better, although it's still a light color. Then when you're done doing that all around all the edges, and I did it on the back as well, you can see there,
I, make sure it's still flat, make sure it still works. There's a slight bit of puckering in my right hand corner, but I don't think it's going to matter since the center is where we're doing this. So I put the inner hoop under that. I kind of press down to make sure that the center part is where my embroidery will be. And again, this is kind of why I didn't put muslin under the entire piece, because I only need the center part. I'm only embroidering that. And I put the outer hoop on, and I've covered these hoops. If you missed that tutorial, it's in a previous video that I will link. But it is helpful because it helps with this tension. And I do tap the top of my fabric to kind of get an idea of, like, if it makes a kind of noise, then it's taut and it's good. And I use pliers to help me close my hoop. I just feel like when it's a certain tightness, like, there's just like this level between, like, oh, I finger tighten it versus I got my little pliers to help me get that last little bit of, like, secured space there. And I feel better working on a project when I know that I've secured it that thoroughly. And if you watch my last video, again, a reminder that you can take the hoop off when you're done with your piece for the night. You probably should for delicate fabrics. Some of us don't because we're bad at what we do.
So when I'm done embroidering all the pieces, all the faces of the reticule, I will then cut through those basting stitches, those catch stitches, and then also cut closer to the piece on the back side, like not cut like against the threads, but just like leave maybe like half an inch around all of that main piece, just to give that a little bit of something to stick on, just to help it along. But I thought that was really, really helpful in terms of just giving me a little bit more to work with, and also not being scared of shredding up that silk as I was going back and forth on it. I hope this was a helpful technique to learn, and definitely not the only technique out there. If you have other favorite, stabilizers or tips on stabilizing places where you're doing needlework, definitely let me know. I'd love to hear about them. Reminder that a little series like this are going to be things that my patrons can vote on. My little embroidery series that I did here on setup was voted on by my patrons earlier in the summer. And so when I have content blips like this, I do ask patrons to chime in on what they want to see. If you are not already a patron, you can join at the link in my description, and you can also leave me a tip on Ko-fi or any other place if you so choose. And there is a free way to support me, which is to comment, like, and share any of the videos or any content that you see. That is super, super helpful. Okay, and with that, thank you for joining me, and don't forget to make it so.